It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All the sports news you need every day in under 20 minutes. Follow Locked On today on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, buddy, with NBA passing down some new rules and regulations regarding this upcoming season, we're talking about it. Hit us with the beats.
That's right. We're going to comb through it line by line, fact by fact. This is going to grind this podcast to a halt. And no, we talk about the overarching news coming down from Shams out there in the Twitterverse, things that are going to affect as far as how different arenas, and specifically the Brooklyn Nets and Barclays Center, will be operating this year and what it means for the teams on an individual level. And I think we do a nice job really sussing down the knowledge for everybody.
Oh, it's a lot of hot Vax talk, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR.com. You know the drill. If you're heading into the football season here, you need some DFS plays, go to DFSR.com. And that is Adam Armbrecht, the host of the One Giant Podcast, the voice of the Brooklyn Nets on Sportscaster. Buddy, we're sitting here Wednesday evening, just trying not to get blown away by the tornadoes that are ripping through our area.
You better believe it, man. You're coming in high energy. I love it. I love the way you're feeling. I don't love that.
Well, you know, can I tell you why? I can tell you why. My energy's high because I've been instructed by the alerts that come through every 10 seconds here to move to my basement.
I was going to say was, you know, I'm as concerned about a tornado as I am when the alert goes off that something could be exploding for all I know. These things are incessant. So who knows? We may get a little live update on the state of the area and whether or not we should all be battening down the hatches, so to speak. But in the meantime, we still got other Nets related stuff. And I think this usually is, as we always say, right when you think there's not going to be something to talk about, more news. And this is Nets related and also NBA related really as a whole.
Oh, a lot of hot vaccination talk about to come your way through the old Locked On Nets podcast here because during the day, Shams Charania from The Athletic, who we actually mentioned yesterday as having the source on for the DeAndre Jordan possible buyout, went on a little bit of a tweet spree around what the new regulations are going to be around vaccinations heading into this NBA season. Now we haven't talked much COVID here. We're a basketball podcast, so we avoid this stuff because this is probably not why you come to a basketball podcast to talk COVID and vaccinations and pandemic and whatnot. There's plenty of other sources for that. This is where it kind of lands in your lap and you have to talk about it. So I'm going to go through a couple of these tweets and then we can round back into the state of affairs of what's heading into the NBA season. So, and I'm going to sum up some and I'll verbatim a couple others. Some of them don't really need read. They don't need the full dialogue. Okay, so the first one, NBA is going back to normal bench seating. Teams don't need to have cool down or timeout chairs or assigned seats, and then game day personnel are going to be expected to wear face masks at the end of the season. Basically, summing that one up, NBA is going to look in stadium a lot like it's looked in the past, right? Like that's just summing that up. Like the benches are going to look like the benches have looked through time immemorial with basketball that have just been different between the bubble and last season with that big spacing. So that's number one. Okay, no big deal. Second one, we're going fans within 15 feet of the court must be fully vaccinated or have a negative COVID test prior to the game. Not tons of a surprise on that one, just based on the kind of current state of affairs with the world. You can stop me, buddy, if you have something to weigh in on these ones. I'm going to get to the big ones here in a second. Third one. Yeah. Don't read the comments, folks. That's where you can go wrong with some of these tweets. Okay. So then the next one is, this is where it starts to get pretty interesting. This is from sources that Shams is quoting. Unvaccinated NBA players in markets with local requirements. So that would be New York City and San Francisco, among others, by the way. He quotes these two as having local requirements. Singles these ones out because I believe the size of the markets. I believe there are other ones. Will not be allowed to enter home arenas or facilities for games or team activities conducted there unless there's approved medical or religious exemption. Okay, so that basically says unvaccinated NBA players in the markets with the local requirements. Now, it really gets going in this final one, and then I'm gonna get your opinion on this. So that was the first one, and a bunch of other people had questions about it. Then he follows this up by saying, this follows local governmental policies, meaning unvaccinated players on the Nets, Knicks, and Warriors are not allowed to play in home games. Visiting players are exempt from the vaccination requirements in New York City and San Francisco. And this is where people kind of started going nuts, right? So because I'll just sum this up, and then I've been talking for a while now. Basically what he's saying is, according to the way the policies are set up in local regions, the players in those local regions at home games, meaning I'll just say for the Nets, if a Nets player is not vaccinated, the Nets player cannot play when they're playing in Brooklyn. That does not apply when the Nets go on the road. Conversely, if other teams come in, those players' vaccination status are, from what I read, are neither here nor there because they're from an exempt area, so they can come in and play, even though the Nets players cannot. So I think I summed up where we are in our hot vaccination talk. Thoughts on this, because I think this kind of threw people's minds into a little bit of a disarray about sort of how some of the season might play out.
Boy, that was steamy, Doug. Thank you. I can barely contain myself. So, yeah, just on the surface of... So, I said this to you when we were texting before we got on, that in covering the Giants, you've been seeing this kind of play itself out a little bit. Some players that have been released, coaches aren't outright answering the media questions when saying if vaccination or lack of vaccination can be a factor, but they allude to it. And I think you could have seen that COVID, we'll say, was still going to have an impact on the NBA season. In terms of the teams inside the areas and markets that have to follow local business restrictions and laws, makes sense, right? Like you're in the area, that makes sense. So that's just what it falls underneath, and how that impacts any players on the Nets or the Knicks or any of these markets, we'll find out, as we go forward. To your point, where everyone starts losing their mind, and where I do get it, is I guess this would be the equivalent of me living in, I'm going to say Pennsylvania, assuming they don't have the restrictions around, vaccination. That'd be like me coming from the restaurant in Philly and coming into Brooklyn, but because I came from Philly, the rules of the Brooklyn restaurant need not apply to me. I think this is where it gets a little bit, it seems like it gets in the weeds here by a policy standpoint, because it should just be a blanket thing. And I think we've seen this before with some of the NBA policies where they don't totally add up. And this isn't about where anyone stands on COVID or vaccinations or not, just about the policy, about what it's going to mean going forward. The fact that this isn't a league-wide thing that all teams coming into these areas would have to abide by completely seems to diminish the point of having to follow the local rules and restrictions. I think that generally sums it up for me.
Well, yeah, it's just confusing. I want to be very clear about something. I'm not speaking for Adam here. We actually didn't talk about this piece. I'm not interested in debating whether a person should be vaccinated or unvaccinated on this podcast. It's just that's not. I don't want anyone to misconstrue what they're hearing from at least me. Adam can weigh in however he wants on that. I'm not offering an opinion either here or there on that. I'm not interested in offering the opinion here because whatever. What I am saying is I agree with you around there's massive confusion around this, because it doesn't seem like if you are... So there's two problems with this. One, there's clearly not a league-wide policy, whatever it's going to be. The league-wide policy could be, we don't care, do what you want. Okay, that's fine, it's a league-wide policy. The other league-wide policy could be, every player needs to get vaccinated. Okay, that's another league-wide policy. They're not defining a policy that looks like they're maybe not happy, but allowing local governance to decide what the policy is. Okay, that's going to end up being problematic. We can talk about that in a second. Second of all, I'm not debating this piece. This is strictly logistical. That this is clearly for the NBA at this point, not a safety thing, because there's like you said it before, they're not dealing with whether they think maybe they say they're not worried about the safety piece of it, and that's just maybe that is what they're saying, because otherwise there's no other way to interpret it, or they're just saying do what you want, because like you said, like it shouldn't matter if you walk 2 steps over, the New Jersey to New York state line for whether it mattered if you were vaccinated. Like that's not a protocol. That's just sort of a local rule. So it's just funny. I'm sure this is going to change, by the way, before the season starts. Like, was there any chance that this is the policy going into the season, or because otherwise it just like makes no sense just on a strict X's and O's to put in basketball parlance. On an X's and O's level, it makes no sense no matter sort of how you feel about that. Actually, it's funny. No matter if you're pro or against vaccinations, these rules don't make sense.
No, that's what I mean. Like, you can make it any scenario that you want. It's just saying that, like, Timmy's outside the school. He can play in the sand and eat dirt if he wants to. Billy's in the school. Billy can never eat dirt or touch sand. But if the other kid wants to come inside and eat the dirt, that's okay, because he was already out there and whatever. Like, this is such a dumb analogy. I apologize, but it doesn't matter what the scenario is. It's just this is a dumb rule, a dumb policy, a dumb way to address this thing that is happening. By the way, yeah, go ahead.
It's silly. Like when I said, when it unites both sides of the aisle in thinking that the solution is silly, right? Like, because if you read through the comments, people that are for vaccinations are like pulling their hair out because it makes no sense, and people who are against vaccinations are pulling their hair out because it makes no sense.
Right. That's more what I mean. It's like, I said, that's why it's like, well, you're there, and then the teams that don't have to adhere to these same rules, they're going to come in there. Well, that doesn't make sense on the one side of it. On the other side of it, why would you be restricting or not restricting or whatever it is? That's like, I'm not going to get into the weeds on that, short of saying it's just I guess this is more like, this is what it's more saying is it's a weird way to apply the local rule, right? Like, that's all. If you come into a town, they got a rule, everybody has to follow that rule. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with it. Like, that's the rule. But instead they're just like, but if you're not from here, you don't have to follow the rules when you get here. That's, it's weird. It's just weird. It's just like I'm just strictly boggled from a policy making standpoint. That's what boggles my mind about. Nothing to do with what it's addressing or what it's around. Purely just like, this is a really stupid way to make a rule or policy. That's what confounds me.
Okay, we're gonna get more into this in a second because there's a little more to dissect along these lines. First, some people after this rule come out, they might be sweating a little bit, thinking there's going to need to be some more rewriting of what's going on here. If you're in the mode of sweating, where you've been kind of worried about in the past, you got to use Sweat Block. Sweat Block wipes are the way to go. Look, sweating can be an issue. You're up in front of people. You're worried about what shirt you wore. You're worried about the color. You're worried if you're going to have to change a uniform mid interview or mid presentation. That is not where you want to be. Sweat Block cures the problem for you. I've dealt with this stuff before in the past, speaking in public. Can't help but sweating through the shirts. It's not life or death, but it could just be definitely embarrassing. Sweat Block is stronger and more effective than most clinical antiperspirants. You simply apply it at night before bed. You go to bed, next morning you wake up, you wash, you go about your day. You're not worried about sweat anymore. Guaranteed. It can sound too good to be true, but using Sweat Block just once or twice a week can keep you dry the whole time. No more picking out shirts, like I said, based on color, what's going to hide the sweat better. If you or someone you love is dealing with this, you have to check out Sweat Block. You can do that by getting 20% off at sweatblock.com. You got to use the promo code LOCKEDON, or you can head over to Amazon and CVS. They have it too. But again, put a little wind in our sails. Go to sweatblock.com, 20% off. Use the promo code LOCKEDON, sweatblock.com.
I know this sounds familiar. You got one of those devices that you can catch all the games live on, but another one that lets you stream and all your favorite shows, and you're watching sports and highlights on your phone now. And then you're over on your regular TV. You're going to your neighbor and asking him for the password so you can watch the good stuff, and he says no because you didn't put out the trash cans for him. Well, there's now a very simple way to get all that entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get all your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part? It's no annual contract, so get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more about DirecTV Stream at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Now, you can tell me if we can go a lot of different ways. There's still more to kind of bite away from this. And the one element of it is the impact of this COVID circumstances on sports in general in a unique way as far as businesses go. Like you mentioned, you think that this will not be the policy by the time the season starts. I'm assuming that there will be some type of league-wide thing that covers this in a smarter way. Is that where you were going with that? Or just that it's going to be like, well, we can't possibly have this at all because it doesn't make sense? Which way do you think that the NBA is trying to lean in order to create some continuity?
I mean, if the league if it started tomorrow and they had to change the rule, they would just make it a mandate because that's just his way. Right. That's just I'm using society writ large to inform that, and like especially around sort of big businesses. That's just all about how most big businesses are going about their business these days. So if you're following in lockstep with that, then it would pretty much seem to be the case. I will say I do think there's probably a sense that some of this is. Okay, take this with the spirits then overblown in that I don't think COVID's overblown. I think that this, like the problem for the NBA is probably overblown. Frankly, maybe for the NFL too, because you end up hearing about the cases you end up hearing more about the dissenting opinion around this than you do around the vast majority who it's not a problem for. So if you look at, I just found the stats real quick. If you look at by league, I'm not sure where this is sourced from, but the guy is Joe Pompliano, and this guy's a pretty dialed-in guy around like the business and sports marketplace. He's a really good follow on Twitter, by the way. And he had to say that NFL vaccination rates were hovering right around 93%, and the NBA was at 90% right now. You probably guess that would probably just go up just on this news alone, would be my guess, like some X percentage. So if you're already talking about the percentage of players that are already covered under this, it probably, I'm going to walk back how much of an impact it has, because just based on the numbers, it's not going to affect very many people already, right? If these numbers can be believed. So if you're
only in regards to those, like I've also just, I think because the MLB specifically, I was listening to something the other day about the Yankees, the Red Sox are going through it right now with a lot of protocol cases, usually these percentages are the organizations in totality, like not just the team. So you're talking about front office, you're talking about analytics departments, like the entire Yankee organization when they say 90%. So and that isn't to say that it isn't the same across the board, and that most, like, because you can gauge this in other sports by whether or not certain players are following certain protocols, that they're most likely vaccinated or not. So you can pretty much glean that it's fairly high anyway, and in the spirits of what you're intending of, this felt like, is it fair for me to say that he puts out all this information Shams, and really, it just felt like this is updating, like, somewhat like local policy, right? Like, this stuff was already in place. This wasn't like a newfound thing per se. This is what New York is doing. This is what California or San Francisco specifically are doing. And it was kind of just stating the information about it. And in that way, Twitter being this place where it gets batted around then is obviously going to go in all kinds of absurd directions, as opposed to just realizing that this is something the NBA is going to have to address and navigate this season, as opposed to long, big impact ramifications.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm saying that I agree with. Well, his thing was kind of specific, though. I don't think it was just
okay. This is only because I heard that other piece of the percentages, not to in any way. I'm not trying to detract from. I agree with you, with that sentiment as well, and the general statement of what he's giving.
Yeah. I think it's both things. It's updating local policy. It's also updating sort of what players wouldn't be eligible. I did check this 90%. I found two more sources that said 90% of NBA players. Are vaccinated.
Nice. And again, so that's like to your point, right? It's pretty darn high for the real teams or situations where it's actually going to be a problem.
This is what I mean. I think what we're going to find out is that while this sounds bad on paper, disjointed on paper, we'll probably end up finding out that in practice it's not going to be that big of a deal, because the numbers around the players that it would actually affect in the different markets is it's already, if these numbers can be believed, it's already at 10%. My guess would be lower than that by the time the season starts, just because certain players will just, end up deciding to do it to save whatever the, maybe what they perceive to be a hassle around it. I'm not sure. I'm not, not trying to get in people's head around that. But it's just I think that's a pretty educated guess around that piece. And so if you're already at that number, my guess is it's one of these things that makes you rip your hair out when you read it and not being confused about it. But then when it actually put down about who is going to end up showing up in the court, you find out it's like, well, it turns out just like almost everyone has it, so it doesn't matter, like,
and that's again that idea, just of anything, again on Twitter and really in general, right? When news breaks, the instant reaction as opposed to the digestion of information, and and taking a step back, looking at the big picture. Okay, like what does this really mean? Not just what does the hot button statement make you immediately respond with, like the patience, right? Twitter is not the best place to suss out that type of dialogue. And in general, so it can be difficult to kind of get through, and almost like actively through this conversation, right? Where do we come to? That it's probably not going to be as big of an impact as it felt like in the moment, and there'll probably be some adjustment here as we go forward. I want to get back into this certainly, or any other aspect maybe of, we'll get a little more net specific, but first, of course, got to tell you about Built Bar. If you're looking to maybe get yourself through a dark and stormy night, as Doug and I are, and you can't have any electricity on because there's going to be a big storm coming, go ahead and get yourself a box of Built Bar, friends. Why? Because they got delicious flavors like coconut, cherry barcia, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, Doug Norrie's favorite, strawberry. That's a fact. Orange, cookies and cream, and even German chocolate. I'm on German chocolate this week myself. And if you haven't tried all the flavors, you can get a mix box where you get 2 of each of the delicious 9 flavors. Built Bar is not only delicious for you, it's also healthy. 17 to 18 grams of protein, carbs just 130 to 180, only 4 to 5 grams of sugar, and only 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. Amazing flavors, all tasty, all healthy. Order today and get the grasshopper cookie, the raspberry flavor, whatever you're into. Again, German chocolate. Try it, friends. Built Bar is, of course, going to give you an offer when you head over to Built.com and use promo code LOCKEDON. You'll get 15% off your first order. Promo code LOCKEDON for 15% off at Built.com.
And as we're heading into this time of year, I mentioned at the beginning, gridiron season is about to take place. Football gearing up. Everyone's about to get on the field. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college action this season. College football starting tonight, by the way. Get all the updated odds, props, and contests, including online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest. Open now. Bet online. Head on over to the website, sign up today, receive a 100% welcome bonus for new accounts. Be sure to take advantage of their opening NFL Day super promo. You make a bet on Thursday, September 9th on the season opener between the Bucs and the Cowboys. And if you lose, your wager will be refunded up to $25 for new customers only when signing up and using the promo code NFL100. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports: football, basketball, boxing, and obviously baseball that's kind of rolling through the playoffs. You get some Vegas games too. Don't wait and take advantage. Don't wait and right now take advantage of all the great offers. Ooh, thunder in the background. For all the 2001 season, BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts, promo code LOCKEDON. And one thing I should have actually clarified, and I didn't at the beginning, or we didn't at the beginning, is that the league hasn't been able to mandate a vaccine policy so far, because like right now. So this is the other thing that kind of comes into play here, is that earlier in the week, like 4 days ago, also from Shams, and the NBA released it too, is that they did give out a list of people who had there are vaccination orders in place for NBA personnel. It just applies to everyone except the players. So it was like, and like the list is whatever, it's everything: coaching staff, medical staff, equipment, blah blah blah, player development. It's like literally everybody except the players. And that is because there are union issues around this, right? The NFL Players Association does have a say in mandates that I believe they have a say in mandates that they don't have to necessarily go through. It's like, I think things like this that impact players, like sort of like health or status or whatever, have to be negotiated. And so because as part of the union. So this is the other part where it's like they might just end up becoming to a place of like, well, if they're over 90% anyway, then the union might just say, hey, for the sake of optics or whatever it ends up going to be, we'll just agree to that because we're so far over the threshold of numbers anyway, right? Like, but that is the last piece that we sort of alluded to it but never said it, but that there is a Players Association piece where there has to be a piece where that has to be addressed also.
Yes, and this is at the top when I mentioned about the NFL and coaches acknowledging this. The reason why I said like they alluded to it but wouldn't specifically speak to it being a reason is because were a player to be terminated in the NFL, cut down to 53, if you were to waive a player based on them being vaccinated or not vaccinated, that would go into that's a health decision, a personal decision, and the NFLPA would step in.
By the way, they already did. They just announced today that they were opening an investigation against one of the team, Urban Meyer and the Jags. Like that came out earlier today.
Exactly. Right. So, and that's why I say they allude to it, but you can't specifically talk to it. And again, it's like you say, you're trying to send a message that to hopefully get people on board with whatever direction you want to be. In any of these sports cases, it's just, we don't want to have to deal with any of the things that we dealt with last season. It costs us money. I mean, that's what it comes down to, for all these leagues. So in that regard, same thing, right? NBA, though much different as far as roster cut downs and things like that, but NBA is going to be in the same boat. You can't just say, and now this. It's why you go to the negotiating table. It's why you have the presidents, a couple of new ones this year for the NBA, I think. And all these things have to be sorted out in the background. So it isn't just a one-to-one that a local policy is enacted, and therefore, and maybe that's a part of it too, and therefore every team in the NBA has to follow it. No, we have to also have our own agreement internally as well. So I'll be curious to see what they end up doing with it. And I think maybe you're right with numbers that you stated. At a certain point, you just go, well, it really doesn't matter if we care or not. We've already essentially done what's being asked. We just have to make it official, so to speak.
Yeah, so and my guess is with a few months to go left before the season, that is probably where it ends up, just because I just think it just seems, that's just what sometimes seems the most logical based on just, frankly, a numbers game at this point. Like, if you're already there, then what's the why? Or if you're basically already there, and maybe there's a few other reasons, not medical exemptions, religious exemptions, whatever those end up being, that you just say, if those are in place also, then that just kind of brings the whole number out, and that's what it ends up being. So that'd be my guess. That'd be my guess of where it goes. Didn't think we'd spend a whole podcast talking vaccinations, but I kind of thought we'd never talk COVID stuff because we just avoided so vehemently because we're sport. Did we do it? I don't know.
Well, I guess we started the podcast and we ended the podcast. What we did in between there, that's for you, the listener, to decide. I will say that obviously I'll be excited to get back into Nets related conversations as we continue to go through the off season, because that's more fun. It's more interesting. I mean, we didn't sign up to do a podcast talking about the issues, in the country and local and national government. So there's an NPR probably out there for that. So let's get back to the Nets tomorrow, and I've got tons more takes on LMA and what's going to happen with DJ and everything else. So that's where I lay my head down to rest.
I do think next week we're going to start to see some of these things fleshed out for the Nets in terms of some of these, like the DJ thing. I think we'll get. I just get this feeling we're going to hear some LaMarcus Aldridge news. I feel like this kind of stuff is coming. Enough of it's just sort of being batted around that it feels like maybe we're getting some extension talk. I feel like some of this stuff is coming for the Nets. It might be actually one of these situations where one thing sends a domino effect down to the. No. No, I was clear. I said I'm just kind of guessing at it. There are enough of these things sort of floating out there that I wonder if there will be something of a domino effect around, like the buyout. Like, even not from necessarily from a signing somebody standpoint, but it'll have domino effects around some of these other. Just all these other pieces, they kind of clear it all away at once. I kind of get the sense with enough things that are sort of hanging out there for the Nets that I think there'll be like a sprint all at once to see a bunch of this stuff solved. So maybe next week, the week after, I don't know. Still enough time before the basketball season starts, but there's enough stuff hanging out for the Nets. We know something will come up.
There you go. Can't wait. I'm looking forward to it, I suppose.
All right,
there you go.
Oh, and going out with a whimper. Nice job.
I forgot we were recording a podcast. I apologize. I just wanted to whisper something to you. Just, 1-to-1. Nobody's in the room. And now I'm ready now, though.
I was waiting for you to say.
Let's close it out now, though, because now I'm paying attention.
I was waiting for you to say something like, I'm going to do that again, but we'll leave it in. We'll leave it in. Make sure you listen also, in addition to the Locked On Nets podcast, make sure you listen to Locked On Today as well. You follow the Locked On Today podcast on the Odyssey app, wherever you get podcasts. And for our purposes, make sure you rate and review wherever you listen. 5 stars or bust, folks. Maybe write a little review. It doesn't have to be much. A couple words. Say, how great looking Adam is, and how great of a personality I am. Or switch them around. You never know. You might have feeling one way about one guy and one about the other. Make sure you rate and review the podcast wherever you listen.
Knowledge exists in 2 forms: lifeless, stored in books, and alive in the consciousness of men. The second form of existence is, after all, the essential one. The first, indispensable as it may be, occupies only an inferior position. Bert Einstein!
It gets me every time with that. Could have gone Al,
Little
too.
birdie
Either one.
boy.
Just so you know, either one would have got me. Burt got me a little more. All right, we'll be back again. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
NFL teams are trimming down while the SEC lays down the law. Here's what our local experts are locked on today. Lots of cuts around the NFL today, including Patriots quarterback and former MVP Cam Newton. Make sure you find your favorite Locked On NFL Team podcast today and follow them on Twitter for the latest roster updates. COVID-related absences continue to hamper NFL teams' preseason preparations. The Indianapolis Colts are missing quarterback Carson Wentz, Pro Bowl center Ryan Kelly, and receiver Zach Pascal, who all landed on the reserve COVID-19 list. Our local expert in Indy, Evan Sidery, tells you who will step up in their place today on Locked On Colts. And in college football, the SEC has instituted a forfeiture policy for teams that can't play because of COVID-19. Who will it impact most? The answer is on the Locked On Today podcast. All the sports news you need in under 20 minutes. Follow Locked On Today, wherever you get your podcast. Local experts on the biggest stories. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.